about what really moves the global economy. What comes to mind? Probably brilliant innovators in Silicon Valley, right? Or maybe those massive manufacturing hubs in Asia. But what if I told you there's another force, a quieter one, that might be even more powerful? It doesn't work with code or conveyor belts, it works with legal code, and it's reshaping everything.
Right, we all know this part of the story. The United States is the world's idea factory, dreaming up the next big thing that completely changes how we live.
And yeah, this part's familiar too. Asia is the world's workshop. It takes those big ideas and physically builds them into the phones in our pockets and the cars we drive.
But here's the thing, there's a third pillar to this whole global economy, and it's the one we talk about the least. Europe has, kind of quietly, become the world's rule maker. And as it turns out, that is a massive source of power.
So this power, it isn't loud. It's not about flashy product launches or big announcements. It's a quiet but incredibly strong force, working through these dense legal documents that are, well, redirecting billions in capital, reining in the biggest tech companies, and even changing the value of global currencies.
Okay, so how does this actually work? I mean, how do rules from Brussels end up moving markets? Well, to get it, you've got to understand their core strategy, which has taken a really sharp turn in the last few years.
The big idea here is something called strategic autonomy. And look, don't let the jargon throw you. It's not about building walls or becoming protectionist. Think of it more like building a stronger foundation for their own house. It's a very deliberate plan to cut down on risky dependencies, protect their most important industries, and basically set the global gold standard for how business gets done. And this is where it gets really interesting. You know, when we think of trade disputes, we usually picture these loud, messy tariff wars, right? Well, the EU is playing a totally different game. They use something called regulatory leverage. It's a much quieter, almost surgical approach, and believe me, it is incredibly effective.
The whole philosophy is incredibly simple, but so powerful. I mean, let's face it, the EU is one of the biggest, richest consumer markets on the planet. Access to it is a huge prize. So the message to every global company is crystal clear. You're welcome to sell your stuff here, but you're going to play by our rules.
So let's connect the dots. How does a piece of paper written in Brussels actually end up moving billions of dollars around the globe? Well, it's kind of like a domino effect. The very first thing to react, almost always, is the currency market. Then you see investors start to move their money around, shifting from one sector to another, and finally, you get the big one, a long-term shift of capital, as entire industries and supply chains have to reconfigure.
All right, let's look at case study number 1, big tech. This is probably the clearest example of this power in action. Europe may not have built the world's biggest tech giants, but wow, it is absolutely defining how they're allowed to operate globally. The EU's main weapons here are two landmark laws, the DMA, or Digital Markets Act, which goes after the power of these giant tech gatekeepers, and the DSA, the Digital Services Act, which deals with stuff like online content and user safety. I mean, together, this is one of the biggest attempts ever to regulate the internet.
So what do they actually do? In plain English, these laws are designed to pry open the closed gardens of the big tech platforms, give you and me more control over our own data, and really challenge the ad-based business models that made these companies so incredibly powerful in the first place.
And you have to understand, for the world's biggest tech companies, and let's be real, most of them are American, this is a huge deal. It's not just some extra paperwork. We're talking higher operating costs, being forced to make fundamental changes to their business models. And hey, it even creates a potential opening for smaller European competitors to finally get a slice of the pie.
But hey, this isn't just about the digital world, right? It's not just about software and apps. This regulatory power is literally reshaping the physical world too. They're using a mix of rules and huge investments to completely remake global supply chains.
So what are they focused on? It all comes down to these key strategic areas. They're pouring money into building their own semiconductor industry. Why? So they don't have to be so reliant on Asia. They're scrambling to diversify where they get their energy. And they're going all in on green infrastructure to meet their climate goals. And every single one of these policy moves sends ripples through the markets. They literally create demand for stuff like copper and lithium. They shape the global market for solar panels and wind turbines, and they pretty much dictate where the next generation of factories is going to be built.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. If you're an investor, what's the big takeaway from all of this? It's this, and it is super important. Policy risk is market risk now. You can't separate them anymore.
A decision made in a government building in Brussels can be just as important as a decision made in a corporate boardroom.
So what's the playbook for today's investor? Well, for starters, you have to start watching regulatory announcements from the EU just like you watch quarterly earnings reports. Seriously, look for those policy changes to get the earliest clues on where the money is going to flow next. Pay super close attention to how these digital rules are hitting the US tech giants. And never, ever forget, the currency markets are like the canary in the coal mine. They almost always signal a big shift is coming before anyone else.
So we come full circle. We've got the innovators,
We've got the manufacturers. And now we really get the immense power of the regulators.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question, doesn't it? In this completely interconnected world, who's actually holding the cards? Is it the person who invents the thing, the person who builds the thing, or the person who writes the rules for everybody else?
And maybe the answer is that while flashy tech and giant factories get all the headlines, it's the quiet, sometimes boring-sounding act of setting the rules that's actually steering the entire ship.
Because at the end of the day, there's one simple, unbreakable rule in finance. Capital always follows direction.